I want you to really think about this for a second. If everything you ever desired, like absolutely everything you wanted, was just handed to you today.
Oh, wow. Everything.
Yeah, everything. I mean, down to the most granular detail, right?
Oh,
Imagine unlimited money just hits your bank account. You get total career success, global fame, endless physical pleasure, and this is a big one, complete unconditional recognition from literally everyone you've ever met.
right.
Would you finally actually be at peace? Or would your mind, like maybe within hours or even minutes, just immediately start searching for the next thing to desire?
Yeah. I mean, it really is the ultimate question of the human condition, isn't it?
Right.
Because we spend our entire lives on this hedonic treadmill, just chasing these external markers. We operate under this deeply ingrained biological and cultural assumption that just over the next horizon, you know, lies the actual satisfaction we're craving.
Yeah, the if only I had this, then I'd be happy mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the moment you cross that horizon, the goalpost inevitably moves. I mean, the promotion, the new relationship, the biological release that satisfies for a fleeting moment, and then the baseline resets,
Right.
And the hunger just returns.
And that profound and honestly somewhat terrifying reality of human nature is exactly where we are starting our deep dive today. So, we are exploring a highly advanced, deeply philosophical approach to what is essentially the mastery of our own vitality.
Hmm.
Our mission today is to unpack a practice that I know a lot of you listening already know about, but one that is often just vastly misunderstood. We're talking about the cultivation of life force energy,
Right.
specifically through the practice of semen retention. But and I want to be really clear, here we are entirely setting aside the superficial kind of internet culture around this.
Right, which is such a necessary pivot
Yeah.
because so much of the discourse around this topic has just been reduced to, like, almost gamified biological hacks.
Totally.
The real depth of this practice isn't found in just counting days on a calendar.
No, not at all. And right out of the gate, I just want to set the parameters for this conversation. This isn't about suppressing human nature. It's not some puritanical rejection of desire.
Yeah.
What we are exploring in the sources today is a profound catalyst for the transformation of the soul. I mean, it's an exploration of how taking conscious control over your most potent biological energy forces you into a direct and often deeply uncomfortable confrontation with your true self.
It absolutely forces a confrontation
Yeah.
because you are fundamentally altering your neurochemistry, your psychological habits.
Right.
I mean, when you stop bleeding out your life force, you suddenly have the energy to actually look at the internal structures of your mind.
Right?
And we are living in a modern world that is completely ruthlessly optimized to keep our energy scattered.
Or completely.
If you look at the infrastructure of the attention economy, it profits immensely from an exhausted, distracted populace. A distracted mind that constantly seeks external dopamine hits is just incredibly easy to control.
Mm-hmm.
When your foundational energy is constantly directed outward, whether through endless digital consumption or, physical dissipation, you literally lack the energetic reserves necessary to look inward.
Okay, but let's push on this modern dilemma for a second, because I want to play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
A lot of people would argue that our modern conveniences are like a massive net positive for the human spirit.
Right.
I mean, we have instant access to all the world's art, philosophy, connection.
Yeah.
I can learn about ancient Rome while sitting on a subway or video call someone across the globe. So, isn't this level of access actually nourishing the soul rather than starving it?
Well, it's a compelling argument on the surface, but it really confuses information consumption with actual wisdom or spiritual nourishment.
Oh, okay.
Having access to all the world's information does not equate to having the internal capacity to process it, integrate it, or utilize it. I mean, the paradox of our time is that external achievements and endless external stimuli simply cannot permanently satisfy an inner emptiness.
Right.
The human soul, or the deep psyche, whatever terminology you want to use, isn't hungry for more data or more possessions. It is hungry for meaning.
Yeah, and that distinction between data and meaning is so crucial. I keep thinking of it in terms of like nutrition. It's as if we are constantly trying to feed a starving body with highly processed junk food.
That's a great analogy.
Right. Like we're consuming digital sugar all day long, scrolling, clicking, reacting to microstimuli, and then we're genuinely bewildered as to why we feel completely hollowed out at the end of the day.
Exactly.
We are overfed but starving on a nutritional level. The soul simply cannot hear itself amidst all that constant deafening noise.
And that constant noise triggers a relentless stress response.
Yeah.
You mentioned the conveniences of modern life earlier, but let's look at the actual psychological landscape. We have unlimited entertainment and stimulation right in our pockets, yet anxiety is skyrocketing.
Off the charts.
Clinical depression is increasing. We are experiencing an epidemic of profound loneliness. We have everything we could possibly want at our fingertips, but we have never felt more disconnected from our own internal center of gravity.
Because it's the attention economy operating at maximum efficiency. Human attention is literally the most heavily traded commodity on Earth right now. Every algorithm is precision engineered by neuroscientists to hijack your dopaminergic pathways. And the contrast is just jarring. Like, the texts point out that people can spend 6 hours effortlessly scrolling through a feed, completely hypnotized, but if you ask them to sit in silence in an empty room for 10 minutes, it feels like actual torture.
I can't do it.
They'll binge endless hours of content and then genuinely complain that they lack the drive or creativity to start their own projects. They chase these momentary bursts of pleasure all day long and wonder why a lasting sense of happiness remains completely out of reach.
Well, because the human nervous system was never designed for this level of continuous low-effort reward. When you are continuously taking in stimulation, your brain's reward centers become downregulated. You require more and more novelty just to feel normal.
Right, the tolerance builds up.
Exactly. And more importantly, from the perspective of life force mastery, you're continuously directing your vitality outward. You are giving your essence away to the screen, to the noise, to the momentary physical impulse.
So, okay, if constant consumption leaves us empty, how did humanity manage this before the digital age? Because the biological drive, the sexual energy, the desire for distraction, these aren't new phenomenons, right?
No, not at all.
They're hardwired into our evolutionary biology. So how did ancient cultures solve this problem of scattered energy before they even knew what dopamine was?
Well, they understood it experientially and philosophically. And what's really fascinating is how many completely independent traditions arrived at the exact same conclusion regarding foundational energy.
Right. The sources cover so many different traditions here.
Yeah, like in ancient India, you have yogic traditions practicing brahmacharya. Now, people often translate that simply as celibacy, but the actual Sanskrit root translates closer to conduct aligned with the divine or moving in the reality of Brahma.
So it wasn't just about not doing something.
No, exactly. It was about harnessing creative energy to achieve higher states of consciousness.
And it wasn't just in India either. You see the exact same principles in ancient Chinese alchemy. The Taoist masters placed an enormous emphasis on cultivating what they called Jing. And Jing isn't some abstract, floaty, metaphysical concept. In traditional Chinese medicine and Taoist internal alchemy, Jing is the most dense physical matter within the body. It is the foundational essence, closely associated with sexual fluids and reproductive energy.
Hmm.
The Taoists believed that depleting your Jing literally shortened your lifespan and drained your physical vitality, while preserving and transmuting it was the key to deep wisdom and longevity.
And we see variations of this in the West too, right? The Stoics in ancient Greece and Rome subjected themselves to rigorous philosophical training to master their impulses.
Hmm.
They recognized that being a slave to your biological urges compromised your rationality and your freedom.
Right.
Across the board, from mystics withdrawing into profound silence to martial artists conserving their energy before battle, the core motivation was never about hating life.
Yes, exactly.
This is where modern observers get it so wrong. The ancients didn't practice retention or impulse control because they thought pleasure was inherently evil or dirty.
Right. That leads perfectly into defining the true practice. The most critical misunderstanding we need to shatter right now is that this practice is about repression.
Yes.
If you hear semen retention and you immediately think of a fearful avoidance of sexuality or a deep-seated hatred toward human desire, you are entirely missing the point. Desire is not the enemy.
No.
Desire is the engine of the universe. Without it, absolutely nothing would ever be created.
It all comes down to a fundamental law of human nature that these ancient traditions understood implicitly. Energy follows attention. And where attention goes, life flows.
Mm-hmm.
If your attention is constantly fixated on the lowest, most immediate biological release, your life force flows out of you and dissipates into nothing. If you gather that attention and direct it upward toward creation, toward healing, toward self-mastery,
Yeah.
the energy transforms.
So the pivotal question to ask yourself, and I really want you listening to internalize this, is not whether you possess desire. The question is, does desire possess you?
Oh, that is the exact dividing line between freedom and slavery.
Yeah.
Because desire is only destructive when it operates in the dark,
Huh?
when it is entirely unconscious.
Right.
When you are blindly reacting to every urge, every notification, every biological impulse, you are functioning as a biological automaton. You are a slave to your own neurochemistry and to the external environment that exploits it.
Let's ground this in a couple of incredibly powerful metaphors from the text to really understand the mechanics here. Think of a massive roaring river. A river in its raw, undirected form can overflow its banks, flood valleys, and completely wipe entire villages off the map. It's pure destructive chaos.
Yeah.
But that exact same water, with the exact same kinetic energy, can be channeled through a hydroelectric dam to power an entire civilization. It can be routed through irrigation canals to turn a barren desert into a flourishing agricultural hub. The water hasn't changed. The energy is identical. The only difference is conscious direction.
That's brilliant. And fire is another perfect parallel. Fire is inherently neutral, right? Doesn't have a moral alignment. What dictates the outcome of the fire is the consciousness of the hand wielding it.
Exactly.
If you use it consciously, fire warms your home, it cooks your food, and it provides illumination in the dark. If you wield it unconsciously or let it run wild, it will burn your house down to the foundation. Sexual energy, the biological drive to reproduce, is the human equivalent of that fire. It is raw, unbelievably potent fuel.
But wait, I have to challenge this concept slightly because it sounds almost too poetic. Are we saying that the energy used to paint a masterpiece, or build a company, or lead a community is literally the exact same biological energy used for physical reproduction?
Yeah, that's the claim.
Because a skeptic would argue that creativity is just cognitive effort, entirely separate from sexual drive.
It's a very fair pushback. But if we look at it through the lens of both evolutionary biology and depth psychology, the boundary between the two really dissolves.
How so?
Well, the sexual drive is the most powerful force in any biological organism, right? It is the imperative to create life, to project yourself into the future, to manifest something that did not exist before.
Okay, yeah.
When you deny that energy its immediate physical release, it doesn't just evaporate. The neurochemicals associated with motivation and pursuit, primarily dopamine and testosterone, they remain elevated. So the brain, seeking an outlet for this heightened state of arousal and drive, reroutes that energy into other forms of creation. You are essentially tricking your biology into believing that to fulfill its ultimate purpose, it must conquer the environment, build, create, and solve complex problems. It is the literal sublimation of the reproductive drive into the creative drive.
Wow. Okay, so synthesizing this. If you direct that raw fuel unconsciously, you create a life of addition, scattered focus, and slavery to impulses. You are letting the fire burn the house down while the river washes away the ruins.
Precise.
But directed consciously, that exact same physiological arousal metamorphoses into discipline. It turns into art, service, deep love, and leadership. It's the same fuel, just routed into a completely different engine.
Exactly. And this monumental shift from unconscious dissipation to conscious direction is the absolute core of the soul's transformation. However, and this is a big however, as anyone who has ever attempted to master a deeply ingrained biological habit knows, this shift is incredibly violent to the ego. It does not happen overnight, which forces us to confront the reality of the practice. What happens when the biological drive overrides the prefrontal cortex and you inevitably fail?
Yeah, let's dive deep into the concept of failure here, because the modern self-improvement space has created a remarkably toxic framework around this. We live in an era of gamification. Everything is about streaks.
Oh, yes, the streaks.
You see it on productivity apps, language learning apps, and especially in communities dedicated to practices like semen retention. It becomes an obsession. I am on day 42, I lost my streak, I am back to day 0. This obsession with perfection actually completely undermines the spiritual foundation of the practice.
It's an illusion born from a society that demands instant gratification and overnight transformation. We treat psychological and spiritual growth like we treat Amazon deliveries, We want the result immediately.
Next day, delivery enlightenment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you look at the natural world, which operates on the exact same underlying principles as our own biology, we see a completely different rhythm. Trees don't grow in bursts. They grow infinitesimally slowly over decades.
Right.
Mountains are pushed up from the earth over millions of years. The seasons transition gradually. Nature never rushes, yet absolutely everything is accomplished.
So patience is not just a virtue in this practice. Patience is the operational mechanism. The neuroplasticity of the brain changes gradually, the hormonal baseline of the body changes gradually, and the unfolding of the soul requires immense grace.
Which brings us to the alchemy of a relapse. When someone who's been cultivating their life force suddenly gives in to the impulse, the immediate reaction is usually overwhelming shame. They feel they have destroyed all their progress.
Back to day 0.
Right. But a profound shift occurs when you reach a state where you no longer fear falling. Why? Because a relapse, the physical act of losing that streak, is not the actual failure. Remaining unconscious to why you fell is the failure.
This is where we need to bring in Carl Jung, because Jungian psychology is incredibly relevant here. How does a failure, a moment of weakness, actually become a diagnostic tool for the soul?
Well, Jung famously observed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. We all have a psychological shadow, the repository of our repressed fears, unhealed traumas, insecurities, and unmet needs. When you are retaining your vital energy, you are essentially starving your brain of its favorite, easiest coping mechanism. You are removing the pacifier.
And when you remove the pacifier, the underlying pain starts screaming.
Yes.
When you relapse, it isn't just a random mistake or a simple lack of discipline. The fall reveals exactly what was hiding in the shadows.
Yeah.
When you analyze a relapse with brutal honesty, you discover the hidden triggers. You realize, oh, I wasn't actually overwhelmed by biological lust in that moment. I was experiencing profound loneliness. Or I was terrified of an impending failure at work and I desperately needed to escape the stress. Or I felt entirely hollow and I needed a microscopic hit of validation.
And that realization is the alchemy. The relapse forces the unconscious pattern into the light. Once that shadow is visible, it loses its absolute power over you. You can finally address the root cause, the loneliness, the stress, the trauma, rather than just constantly medicating the symptom with a biological release.
Right.
The suffering of the failure literally becomes the ultimate teacher. It transforms suffering from a senseless punishment into a targeted awakening.
It's like a child learning how to walk. When a toddler takes 3 steps and then falls hard on the floor, we don't point at them and declare them a failure.
Right, that would be insane.
We recognize that the falling is an integral, non-negotiable part of developing the neurological pathways required for balance. It is pure growth. In the realm of internal alchemy, the sword must be sharpened against hard stone, and gold is only purified when it is subjected to intense fire, not when it sits comfortably in the dirt. The struggle itself is the purifying agent.
It's a complete paradigm shift. You move from a state of fragile perfectionism to a state of robust, anti-fragile curiosity. So once these shadow elements are exposed, and the practitioner begins to consciously work through this cycle of effort, failure, and radical self-honesty, how does the landscape of the mind actually begin to change? Like, how do we work with the mechanics of our own psychology?
Well, now that you are aware of what you are actually fighting, which is rarely just the physical urge, but rather the psychological shadows driving it, you enter the battlefield of the mind. There is a classic riddle of the 2 wolves that perfectly illustrates this internal division.
Oh, I love this one.
Yeah, imagine you have 2 wolves fighting a vicious battle inside your chest. One wolf represents the primal reactive self. It seeks immediate comfort, it demands cheap pleasure, it thrives on shortcuts, and it wants to constantly numb out. The other wolf represents your highest potential. It seeks immense growth. It desires long-term fulfillment. It thrives on delayed gratification, and it demands absolute mastery. The riddle poses a simple question. Which wolf wins the fight?
And the answer is profound in its simplicity. The one you feed.
Exactly. But the mechanics of how you feed them is where the real work lies. Everything is food. We often think of big, dramatic life choices as the food, but it's the microscopic moments.
Right.
Every single thought you passively entertain is food. Every small, seemingly insignificant habit is food. Every time you pull out your phone to avoid a moment of boredom, you are throwing a massive stake to the wolf of comfort.
Yeah.
Every time you take a cold shower or sit with an uncomfortable emotion without medicating it, you are feeding the wolf of mastery. You are actively nourishing one of these entities every minute of every day. So the terrifying question you have to ask yourself is, what version of myself am I keeping alive right now?
To expand on the mechanics of this, imagine 2 gardens. This is a brilliant way to conceptualize neuroplasticity, actually.
Okay, let's hear it.
The first garden is completely neglected.
Yeah.
The soil is dry, weeds are choking out any viable plants, and chaos reigns. Nothing of value can grow there because the environment is too hostile. This represents the mind addicted to cheap dopamine and constant biological release.
Right?
The second garden is meticulously cared for. Every single day, the gardener is out there pulling weeds the moment they sprout. The soil is watered. Patience is practiced as the seeds slowly germinate. Over time, that garden yields an incredible sustaining harvest.
And in this context, the garden is the landscape of your mind. Your thoughts, your impulses, and your daily habits are the seeds. And your attention, your highly concentrated life force is the water.
Yes.
The harsh reality is that you are always planting seeds. The human brain never stops operating. The only question is, what are you growing? Are you consciously directing your attention to water the flowers of discipline and creativity? Or are you just desperately trying to ignore the sprawling weeds of anxiety and addiction that are overrunning your mind?
And this is where the practitioner hits a wall. When you start pulling those weeds, when you finally cut off the supply of cheap dopamine and you stop scattering your vital energy, you encounter a state that is initially absolutely terrifying.
The void.
Yes. When the noise stops, it doesn't instantly feel peaceful. It feels like a void. But if you can endure that initial terror, it transforms into the most profound gift of this entire practice. Stillness.
Yeah.
The hidden, immense power of stillness. It is the shift from relying on external noise for comfort to discovering inner silence. It's fascinating, neurobiologically, what happens when you starve a brain of its constant stimulation. After the withdrawal phase, the dopamine receptors begin to upregulate. Your sensitivity to life returns. And it is in this newly discovered inner silence that abstract concepts like gratitude, profound love, absolute presence, and unshakable peace are discovered not as philosophical ideas you read in a self-help book, but as visceral, lived biological realities. Because wisdom simply cannot be downloaded. We live in an age where we think we can acquire wisdom by listening to by listening to an audio track or reading a quote.
Right.
You can acquire data that way, but wisdom is lived, integrated understanding. It has to be earned through direct experience. By retaining your life force, you force yourself to sit in the fire of your own unmet desires. You force yourself into the experience of stillness.
Let's use the lake analogy to really visualize how this clarity manifests. Imagine a deep mountain lake. When the water is constantly disturbed, when high winds are howling, when rocks are being thrown into it, when the currents are violent, the water becomes incredibly cloudy.
Yes.
Silt is picked up. You can't see an inch beneath the surface. That is the mind caught in the cycle of endless desire and release. But when the wind dies down and the lake is perfectly, absolutely still, the silt settles to the bottom. The water becomes crystal clear and the surface reflects the sky like a perfect mirror. You can see all the way to the depths.
What is crucial to understand about this analogy is that clarity is not something you add to the lake. You don't dump a bucket of clarity into the water. Clarity is simply the natural state that reveals itself when the agitation and unnecessary turbulence finally cease.
Which completely upends how we think about self-improvement. And this brings us to what I consider the absolute core of this deep dive. It is the most powerful paradigm shift we've discussed today. It's what many practitioners eventually realize after years on this path. It is the art of unbecoming.
It flips the entire Western model of achievement completely upside down.
Totally.
We are taught that growth is additive. You must acquire more skills, build a bigger personality, construct a stronger ego, and hoard more knowledge to become someone of value.
Exactly. You start this practice thinking, I am going to become a superhuman. I am going to become stronger, smarter, more spiritual, more enlightened. But as you sit in that stillness, as your life force pools and strengthens your awareness, you realize you aren't actually becoming anyone. You are engaging in a radical process of subtraction. You are systematically stripping away what you are not.
It is the painful, glorious peeling back of layers. When you stop bleeding your energy out into the world, you finally have the internal pressure necessary to dismantle the false architectures of your ego. You begin to identify and discard the deep-seated fears that aren't actually yours. You shed the societal conditioning that told you what success should look like. You drop the heavy, exhausting masks you've worn to impress people you don't even respect. You sit with the old, festering traumas until they integrate. You ruthlessly discard your limiting beliefs. It is a process of total psychological excavation.
So the obvious question is, when you strip all of that away, when you remove the ego, the trauma, the biological compulsions, and the societal masks, what is left at the center? If I am not my desires, and I am not my fears, what remains?
What remains is the true self. And this is where the psychology merges with the mystical. The core that remains is described across all wisdom traditions as something inherently timeless. It is a state of consciousness that is entirely peaceful, completely whole, and fundamentally undamaged by the traumas of life.
Right.
It's remarkable to trace this through history. Various traditions have pointed to this exact same irreducible center, using different language. Carl Jung might call it the self. Christian mystics call it the kingdom within. Buddhist traditions refer to pure awareness or Buddha nature. The Taoists call it aligning with the Tao. Others call it the divine spark.
Different fingers pointing at the exact same moon. The mystery is singular, and it is always there, waiting silently beneath the chaotic noise of our lives.
Which leads to a profound realization about the human condition. The greatest tragedy of humanity is not that we are hopelessly broken, or that we are inherently evil, or that we are lost in an unforgiving universe.
Right.
The ultimate tragedy is simply a profound case of amnesia. We have forgotten who and what we actually are.
There is a heartbreakingly beautiful metaphor from the text that captures this perfectly. Imagine a single wave on the surface of a vast ocean. Somehow, this wave develops a localized sense of ego and completely forgets that it belongs to the ocean. That wave will spend its entire brief existence in a state of absolute terror. It will feel isolated, separate, and fragile, dreading the moment it crashes against the shore and ceases to exist. It lives in constant anxiety, completely unaware that it is entirely composed of the exact same water as the infinite, unfathomable deep beneath it. It was never separate.
That is the tragedy of forgetting. And in this context, the intense disciplined practice of semen retention or life force cultivation is framed not as a way to build a better wave, but as a biological and psychological mechanism for remembering the ocean. It is a lever you pull to forcibly wake yourself up from the illusion of separation.
Okay, as transcendent and beautiful as that sounds, I want to bring this back down to earth. Because I know there are listeners right now thinking, that is incredibly profound philosophy, and I'm sure it's great for my spiritual development, but I have a mortgage. I have a demanding job. I have a dating life.
Right. The practical application.
Yeah. How does returning to this mystical true self actually change the brutal material day-to-day reality of a person walking this path? What are the actual tangible fruits of this journey?
It's a necessary grounding question because true spirituality is practically useless if it doesn't fundamentally improve how you operate in the physical world. It has to touch the ground. And the most common question thrown at this practice in our modern hyper-capitalist society is, will retaining my semen make me rich? Will it make me a millionaire?
It's the ultimate transactional mindset. If I give up this pleasure, what material reward do I get? And the reality is, maybe it will make you rich and maybe it won't. Cultivating your life force does not magically deposit funds into your brokerage account.
No, it doesn't.
But what it does do is teach you a skill that is infinitely more valuable and much rarer than simply acquiring currency. It teaches you absolute self-management.
And deep holistic self-management is the bedrock of all true wealth. We have been heavily conditioned to view wealth exclusively as a number on a ledger. But that is an incredibly impoverished definition of wealth.
Absolutely.
True wealth encompasses physical and neurological health. It is the capacity for deep, uninterrupted peace. It is the cultivation of profoundly meaningful relationships. It is the freedom to dictate how you spend your time, and, perhaps most crucially, true wealth is possessing a mind that is not functioning as an internal torture chamber.
That is such an important point. Think about the archetypal miserable billionaire.
Yeah,
Someone who has infinite financial resources but is completely enslaved by paranoia, endless desires, multiple addictions, and profound isolation. You cannot call that person wealthy. Their internal landscape is a nightmare. But let's look at how self-management actually drives abundance in the real world. There is an analogy involving a farmer that perfectly illustrates the biology of this.
oh, this is a good one.
Imagine a farmer who is given a finite amount of seeds every season, but instead of planting them, he constantly snacks on them. He just eats his own seeds for a momentary hit of calories.
Yeah.
He cannot possibly expect a harvest come autumn.
It defies the laws of cause and effect.
Mhm.
It is biologically and physically impossible.
Exactly. Now apply this to the human male. A man who constantly desiccates his life force energy, who continually throws away his dopaminergic drive, his focus, and his foundational biological essence on cheap digital pixels or momentary physical releases, is literally eating his own seeds.
Mhm.
When you ejaculate, especially chronically, you are spiking your prolactin levels, which induces lethargy and a refractory period of demotivation. You are downregulating your androgen receptors. You are experiencing the literal neurochemical equivalent of brain fog and diminished ambition.
Yeah, you're draining the battery.
Right. So he shouldn't be surprised when his grand visions and dreams remain completely unrealized. He has burned the fuel required to build them. But when you retain that energy, you stop the bleeding. And that energy begins to compound.
The mathematics of compounding energy are staggering. When you master your impulses, discipline begins to compound. Your capacity for deep, sustained attention compounds. Your emotional resilience in the face of setbacks compounds.
Yeah.
You are no longer operating from a baseline of exhaustion. You create an internal biological and psychological environment where prosperity, in whatever form you pursue it, is infinitely more likely to naturally emerge. You stop trying to violently force success through sheer exhausted willpower, and you begin to biologically align yourself with the capacity to achieve it.
And a massive component of that achievement stems from what we discussed earlier, the river of creativity. Let's unpack the mechanics of sublimation again, because it touches every aspect of a person's material reality. Life force, by its very evolutionary nature, desperately seeks expression, demands to manifest.
It operates like hydraulic pressure. It cannot be bottled up forever. If you just try to suppress it without redirecting it, it will eventually fracture your psyche or result in a destructive behavioral blowout.
Yeah.
It must flow somewhere.
Yes. So when you deny it the easy downward biological release, that pressure forces the energy upward into the higher faculties of the brain and the heart. Whether you are a painter staring at a blank canvas, a software engineer trying to solve a complex algorithm, an entrepreneur trying to scale a business, or a community leader trying to inspire people, the drive, the obsessive focus, the vitality you were using is that exact same transmuted sexual energy.
Exactly.
Creativity is quite literally sexual energy that has been cognitively refined and redirected into the world.
And this redirection doesn't just supercharge your career or your artistic pursuits. It radically transforms the nature of your relationships with other human beings. This might be the most profound material shift of all. Well, when your neurochemistry is no longer hijacked by chronic biological need, your perception of the people around you changes entirely. You stop viewing them through the predatory or needy lens of physical attraction. You stop assessing every interaction based on what you can extract from the other person, whether that's sex, validation, or emotional comfort. You begin to actually see them as sovereign souls.
Because when your energy isn't governed by base impulses, you aren't constantly scanning the room, evaluating everyone as either a potential mate to conquer or a potential threat to neutralize.
Right.
It opens the door to a completely different frequency of connection. There is a deeply profound realization that emerges on this path. True love, in its purest form, has absolutely nothing to do with possession. True love is pure presence.
If you analyze why the vast majority of modern relationships fracture and fail, it is rarely due to an absolute lack of affection. It is almost always due to an overwhelming, suffocating amount of desperate need. It is rooted in deep attachment, insecurity, and the completely unfair expectation that this other flawed human being is somehow going to plug the spiritual hole inside of you and fix your internal state.
Precisely. It's a parasitic dynamic masked as romance. But when you are walking the path of life force mastery, when you have stopped eating your own seeds, when you have endured this stillness, and you actually feel that immense wellspring of energy and peace pooling inside of you, you achieve a level of inner wholeness. You are no longer bleeding out, so you don't need a psychological tourniquet. You aren't desperate for another person to complete you, because you have finally realized you are already entirely complete. And ironically, it is only from that state of absolute independence that you can finally appreciate a partner for exactly who they are, without secretly attempting to own, manipulate, or control them.
So if we follow this trajectory to its logical conclusion, if this grueling, lifelong practice of internal alchemy yields all these incredible fruits, right? If it grants you unshakable peace, laser-like focus, boundless creativity, and deeply authentic relationships, what is the ultimate endpoint? Where does a master of their life force eventually end up?
This brings us to the final paradox of our deep dive today, what is often called the final riddle. And I have to admit, when I first started studying the philosophy behind these practices, this completely blindsided me.
Really?
Yeah, because the ego's assumption is that the end goal of all this intense monastic discipline, all this shadow work and energy cultivation, is to eventually elevate yourself into some kind of untouchable superhuman. You think you are going to acquire mystical superpowers, become extraordinarily unique, and completely transcend the messy, painful, mundane reality of being a human being.
The ego wants to be a god.
Yeah.
But the absolute zenith of this path is the exact opposite. It is the great paradox of enlightenment. The deep truth is that true awakening has absolutely nothing to do with becoming extraordinary. It is about returning to utter simplicity. It is returning to a state of profound, baseline gratitude. It is a return to a childlike innocence, but with the wisdom of an adult. The ultimate goal of the master is to become profoundly, beautifully, completely ordinary again.
It is about embodying your humanity fully, not escaping it. You don't transcend the human experience. You finally dive all the way into it without the armor of your addictions. There is a classic story from the wisdom traditions that perfectly illustrates the tragic comedy of our endless searching.
Oh, the treasure story.
Yeah. Imagine a man who is convinced there is a legendary, priceless treasure meant just for him.
Huh.
He spends his entire adult life relentlessly searching the globe for it. He crosses treacherous oceans, he scales freezing, inhospitable mountains, he fights wars, he endures decades of terrifying, exhausting struggle, he sacrifices everything. And then, at the very end of his life, broken and exhausted, he returns to the humble home he was born in. And by total accident, he pries up a floorboard, only to discover that the treasure chest was buried directly beneath his own house the entire time. He literally slept on top of it every night before he left.
It's a devastating story, but it is the exact psychological blueprint of almost every human life. We spend decades agonizingly searching the external world. We seek endless physical pleasure, assuming the next hit will satisfy us. We hoard wealth, assuming the next zero in the bank will make us feel safe. We run faster and faster on the hedonic treadmill of achievement, seeking validation from strangers,
Yeah.
only to eventually exhaust ourselves and discover that the exact things we were so desperately seeking, absolute peace, unconditional love, profound meaning, and pure unfiltered presence, were never actually absent.
They were just hidden. The treasure was always within. It was just buried under a massive, chaotic mountain of digital distraction, chronically scattered energy, unresolved trauma, and unconscious biological desires. Once you clear the debris, the treasure is just sitting there.
Which is exactly why the message to the listener, to anyone attempting to actually walk this path of mastery, is so specific. The encouragement from those who have walked it before is remarkably simple, but it requires immense fortitude. If you struggle against your biology, continue. If you face your shadow and it terrifies you, continue.
Right.
If you relapse, lose your streak, and fall backward into your oldest, most comforting habits, forgive yourself instantly and continue. If you feel completely lost in the dark void of stillness, continue.
Walk your own unique path with absolute sincerity, with incredibly deep patience, and most importantly, with radical humility. Do not undertake this practice to build a spiritual ego. Don't do it so you can look down on other people who are still trapped in the agonizing cycle of their addictions.
Yeah, that defeats the whole purpose.
Do it to become ferociously authentic. Because the real miracle here isn't about acquiring dominance or extending your lifespan or attracting admiration. The greatest miracle a human being can experience is the total transformation of their own heart. It is the act of remembering what it actually means to be a whole human.
So, if we synthesize the entire scope of the journey we have explored today, semen retention, the cultivation of Jing, internal alchemy, life force mastery, regardless of the historical or cultural name you attach to it, was never fundamentally about escaping who you are.
No.
It was never about declaring war on your biology out of some misplaced sense of fear, purity, or shame. The entire journey, from the first moment of resisting an urge to the highest heights of creative sublimation, is simply a process of returning.
It is returning to pure awareness. It is returning to objective truth. It is returning to the source of your vitality. It is returning finally to that true self that has been waiting patiently beneath the chaotic noise of your life this entire time.
It is the ultimate unbecoming, to reveal the masterpiece that was always there.
And as we wrap up this deep dive into the profound transformation of the soul, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, provocative thought to mull over in the silence of your own life. We have talked extensively about freedom today. The fundamental lesson here is that the true opposite of freedom is not pain.
No, it's not.
The opposite of freedom is not rules or boundaries or strict biological discipline. The true opposite of freedom is unconsciousness. It is the tragic state of being asleep at the wheel of your own existence, driven by algorithms and ancient impulses. We established the absolute law that energy truly, undeniably follows attention. So I challenge you to look brutally closely at where you spent your attention today. Where did your precious, finite life force actually flow? Are you purposefully, consciously watering a beautiful garden? Or are you just desperately, endlessly trying to ignore the weeds?
The fire of your vitality is entirely in your hands.
If everything you ever desired was handed to you today, would you finally be at peace? As it turns out, the peace you are looking for fundamentally cannot be handed to you by the world. It must be cultivated slowly and deliberately from within. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the noise, keep guarding your energy, and we will see you next time.